Exactly. Let's unpack this. We are taking a deep dive today into a really fascinating exploration of how bodies change, and equally important, how we understand and represent those changes.
That's right. Our source material for this is an interdisciplinary collection of essays. It's called Bodies in Transition in the Health Humanities, edited by Lisa M. DeTora and Stephanie M. Hilger.
And our mission really is to pull out the most powerful insights from this book. We want to understand how these transformations of the body challenge the traditional ways we think about identity and categories.
Yeah, and how a field like the health humanities helps us make sense of it all.
Exactly. We've got sources covering quite a range, everything from old anatomical models to very personal stories of illness, and even looking at science fiction films.
It's a collection that really pushes us, I think, to think beyond these static definitions of the body.
So let's jump right in. The central idea the book puts forward is this. The body is fundamentally not static. It's always, in some way, in transition. And while some transitions, maybe like sex transition, are very visible right now, the book makes it clear they're looking much broader. We're talking illness, injury, aging, surgery, even death.
And what's so interesting about these changing bodies is how they can truly uh, that's the word the authors use, challenge, or maybe even upend many of the fundamental binaries that structure our daily lives.
Right, the pairs we constantly rely on.
Exactly. Male,
Right.
female, well, unhealthy, able, disabled, beautiful, ugly. When a body transitions significantly, those lines, they can really blur or disappear.
And sometimes, particularly when trauma or serious illness is involved, bodies can become almost culturally or socially illegible.
Yeah.
The authors suggest they can enter realms seen as, well, abject or even horrifying because they don't fit neatly. There isn't really a ready language for that kind of change.
Precisely, and that raises the big question.
Yeah.
How do we even start to understand these complex shifting forms? And that's where Health Humanities comes in. One key point the book makes is that this is a sort of recent evolution of medical humanities, but what's really important is it specifically includes perspectives from patients and non-physicians.
Ah, so not just doctors looking at them.
Exactly. It broadens the lens, makes it much more inclusive of lived experience, and they frame its role as providing this essential interdisciplinary way to read and understand bodily transformation, how it's experienced and how it's represented across art, literature, visual culture.
And the language used in medicine itself, I suppose.
Right. And it's not just about passively observing. The authors really emphasize that health humanities has a critical function. It's designed to actively challenge norms, power dynamics, hierarchies within healthcare. It deliberately moves beyond just analyzing, say, clinic interactions to look at the broader social, political, historical forces that shape how we understand health and bodies.
I like that distinction. It's not just an add-on, it's a tool for critique, for change, maybe. They even mention a concept they call critical healing.
Yes, seeing critical analysis and even activism as potentially part of the healing process itself, recognizing that healing isn't just biological. It can involve challenging these oppressive systems and narratives.
So why should you, listening right now, care about this approach? It seems like it's because, as this collection really shows, health and illness are never just biological facts.
They're deeply intertwined with social context, cultural meaning, history, personal experience.
Seeing that can fundamentally change how we view not just illness, but really anybody that deviates from what we think of as normal.
It just offers a way to engage with bodies and health that acknowledges their full human complexity.
Okay, let's step back in time a bit. The book explores how we've tried to understand and represent the body historically, and it tells us quite a lot about our assumptions. They talk about anatomical wax models, 18th, 19th centuries. Why wax?
Well, there were significant, religious and ethical taboos around dissecting real bodies back then. Wax offered a way around that. It was also just convenient, easier to work with, and it preserved color and shape in a way corpses, well, couldn't.
Right.
And what's interesting, as the authors note, is that these early models often depicted very idealized, very healthy bodies. It reflects that view of the body as sort of God's perfect creation.
So the goal wasn't pure realism at first, but more about showing an ideal.
Pretty much.
Ah.
But they show how this shifted in the 19th century. Models started focusing more on pathologies, diseases, abnormalities alongside the normal.
Ah.
And this lines up with what the book calls the visual turn in science during the Enlightenment, a move away from relying mainly on text towards really privileging vision, making the invisible visible.
Like an early form of medical imaging almost? Trying to get inside visually without cutting,
Oh.
foreshadowing x-rays and things.
Precisely. And this visual exploration was deeply tangled up with cultural norms, especially around gender. The book looks at historical gendered understandings of anatomy in the 18th century. Skin, for instance,
Yeah.
often associated with femininity, sensibility. Muscles, on the other hand, linked to masculinity.
So women were seen more on the surface, men in the underlying structure. Is that fair?
To some extent, yes. The female body was often thought of metaphorically as a vessel, with a lot of the scientific focus on reproductive organs.
Hmm.
And the authors point out this really striking taboo around skinning a woman in these anatomical displays. Female écorchés, those models of flayed bodies showing muscles, were very rare.
Wow.
And when they did exist, they were often seen as obscene, precisely because they exposed those inner layers associated with masculinity.
That image alone tells you so much about the cultural baggage there.
Absolutely. And the book connects this to the Enlightenment idea of femininity, spouse, mother. They talk about this female special anthropology, a scientific framework trying to naturalize gender differences in all parts of the body, linking them to motherhood.
You see it in the models.
Yeah, the authors contrast the passive, often reclining postures of female wax models with the active, dynamic postures you see in male écorché.
So scientific representation wasn't just neutral, it was reinforcing those roles. What happened when a body didn't fit neatly into male or female?
Right. That brings us to the 18th century scientific focus on hermaphrodites. The authors argue this mirrored a new focus on the individual body, a drive to scrutinize it for marks of difference. Enlightenment science really wanted to erase ambiguity, classify these bodies strictly as male or female, sometimes surgically.
But were the scientists themselves always comfortable with that drive?
Not entirely, no. The book's reading of these historical case studies, which were often presented in texts that sort of blurred the line between science and popular literature, reveals this deep intellectual anxiety among the scientists.
Okay.
They were grappling with these profound epistemological shifts, changes in how knowledge was made, the rise of empirical science, new theories. They were trying to fit ambiguous bodies into rigid boxes, and the narratives show the strain.
The book uses the example of Michael Anne Drouart, the Parisian boy girl, discussed by M. Vacherie.
Yes, and as the book analyzes, Vacherie's texts definitely play to audience voyeurism. Phrases like exploring touch during exams, and sometimes even using pronouns like it for Drouart, reflecting that struggle to classify. The authors note another figure, Ferrain, later concluded Drouart was female, but linked it to inheritance issues.
So practical matters like property were tangled up in the science.
It shows how scientific classification was often intertwined with social and legal concerns, yeah. A powerful reminder that science doesn't happen in a vacuum.
So thinking about this history, how do these past ways of seeing and categorizing bodies, sometimes idealized, sometimes voyeuristic, always filtered through norms, how might they still echo today? In medicine, in society?
It really highlights how the binaries we still grapple with have deep roots. Understanding that past helps us see how those assumptions might still be shaping things now, especially for bodies that don't conform.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit. Let's look at how specific bodily transitions and especially interactions with medical systems can profoundly shape identity. Sometimes, as the book shows, with really traumatic effects. It gets into intersex experiences and the role of trauma writing.
A critical point the authors make right away is that people with intersex traits have historically been positioned as objects of medical knowledge, not as producers of knowledge about themselves.
And here's something really striking they bring out. The significance of the medical chart for intersex individuals. It's described not just as paper, but as a vibrant object that actually acts on people. It provides concrete proof of past medical interventions, what they call wounding, and it serves as a tool to help them sort of disentangle their sense of self from the medical system that often define them without their consent.
Yes. The chart becomes evidence. It becomes the catalyst. The authors explain accessing these charts can be incredibly hard legal action sometimes.
Right.
But when they get them, it can help facilitate a move from, say, melancholia, that internalized, unexplained sense of loss or wrongness, to what the book calls militant mourning.
Militant mourning.
Yeah, a process that involves finding community, speaking out, actively reclaiming their own narrative.
That shift from internal burden to external action and connection, it sounds incredibly powerful. The
Hmm.
book shares specific details from narratives they analyze, which really makes it real. Stories like Karen A. Walsh feeling like a freak, Ogle probed by doctors.
Hmm?
Pigeon Pagonis, recounting being a child, told doctors would make an incision for future sex with a husband and giving this shameful yes because what else could they say?
Yeah.
Linnell Stephanie Long discovering the term intersex much later through her own research, finally finding a name for her experience.
These personal accounts are just vital. They move beyond the clinical description to the lived, often traumatic reality of being subjected to these interventions and pathologization.
The book also looks at anorexia and bulimia narratives, focusing on space, the withdrawal from public social spaces. The body becomes a kind of territory, and refusing food is used symbolically.
To mediate their relationship with the outside world, yeah. And within those stories, the authors explore the really ambivalent experience of places like hospitals. They note how social status can really affect a woman's ability to challenge medical authority there.
Oh, so.
Women with less, say, cultural capital or privilege often found it harder to push back against those rigid doctor-patient dynamics.
That really shows how power structures outside healthcare play out inside it too. Then the book turns to transsexuality in Iran, but with an important caution. The authors critique Western media portrayals as often reductive, sometimes neo-Orientalist.
Right, they tried to analyze it within its specific context, cultural, legal. According to their analysis, the Iranian state views transsexuality as an illness, trans people as patients, and crucially, distinguishes them from homosexuals based on willingness to have SRS gender confirmation surgery.
So the medical system is actively constructing identity there.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
Through reports, visible changes,
Yeah.
applying the medical gaze to
Hmm.
classify and regulate, the book shares insights from individuals in a documentary analysis. People like Nushana Hida facing social challenges even after transitioning. Nigar, shunned by family, resorting to sex work, feeling her body is still detached from her soul despite surgery. And Farhad, who actually halts SRS and stays in this permanent state of transition, challenging the fixed categories.
So these examples really show the complexity, don't they? The mix of influences, legal, cultural, medical, personal. It pushes back against simple narratives.
Definitely. And finally, in this section, they look at the gendering of the HPV vaccination campaign, how HPV got framed largely as a woman-centered pathology, and how for-profit mechanisms positioned women as the main health guardians, which kind of reinforces medical surveillance of female bodies.
And the critique presented is
That this approach, by focusing so much on cervical cancer and downplaying sexual transmission in the male role, actually hinders herd immunity. They call for a more gender-neutral relational approach.
that's a clear example of public health potentially reinforcing biases. So thinking about all these cases, intersex stories, eating disorders, trans experiences, HPV, how do norms, medical practices, systems reinforce or challenge these binary views of bodies? And what power do individuals find in reclaiming their stories, challenging the systems?
It shows navigating these systems is often this fundamental negotiation for anyone whose body doesn't fit the expected mold. Reclaiming the narrative seems key.
Okay, let's take another really interesting turn. The book explores some surprising ways our understanding of the body is expanding, challenging the idea that we're fixed individuals, starting with bacteriology around 1900.
Yes, the growing awareness of just how many organisms colonize our bodies led to both bacillophobia, fear of microbes, but also this profound challenge to anthropocentrism, the idea that humans are the center of everything.
Right.
It forced this realization.
Right.
We exist in constant symbiosis.
And this connects to biopolitics, drawing on Foucault Esposito, how bacteria and immunity have been used metaphorically to think about community.
Yeah, and there's this striking idea from Esposito the book highlights that high doses of immunity while protecting the individual might paradoxically reduce life to bare biological matter.
How?
By isolating individuals, cutting them off from necessary interactions with their surroundings. It's a critical view seeing hyperprotection not just as good, but maybe as a form of isolation, a separation from life's interconnectedness. They use Conrad's novel The Nigger the Narcissus as an example, where an infected character paradoxically becomes this site of openness that binds the crew together, shared vulnerability creating community.
And this leads to what I found one of the most, well, mind-bending parts. The ontological implications, what it means for our being. Myra Hurd's micro-ontologies.
Yes, it's framed as a call for an ethics, a way of understanding ourselves that seriously engages the bacterial world, urging us to reconsider basic concepts like identity, even evolution.
It completely turns the idea of the individual as a sealed unit on its head.
Totally. The book brings in the endosymbiont theory. Margulis and Sagan proposing evolution might not just be competition survival of the fittest, but maybe more about networking mutual dependence.
Like how complex cells came from bacteria living together.
Exactly. Cooperation driving life. And this directly challenges what they call immunological individualism. If, like the science suggests, maybe 90% of the cells in our body are bacterial.
Then the human body isn't an individual, it's a symbiont.
Right. Our immune system isn't just rejecting non-self, it's constantly interacting. The self-non-self border isn't fixed, it's dynamic, changing. Individuality isn't static, it's recreated with every encounter, every interaction.
Wow. That really dissolves the hard boundaries we imagine. The book even points to Mark Twain's 3,000 years among the microbes as an early literary exploration of this.
Showing the idea has been lurking in our imagination for a while, even if the science is catching up now.
And bringing it to contemporary culture, they analyze the Alien prequels, Prometheus and Covenant.
Yeah, exploring being, becoming, technology through androids and aliens that blur lines human-machine, animal. The quest for origins isn't about finding one start. It's framed more as shedding origin. Metamorphosis is embodied, central to the horror.
And they connect us to techne from Heidegger. Technology isn't just a tool, but inherent to being.
Exactly. So the fear of technology in those films isn't just fear of machines, but fear of what defines being itself, something often abject, monstrous, changing, like the bodies in the films.
It's a reminder, as they put it, that we too are abject. There's an inherent strangeness and otherness, a fluidity within our own being that maybe we're afraid of. So bringing this back to you, the listener, what does it mean for your sense of self if you're understood not as fixed, but, as the book suggests, a constantly interacting symbiont tangled up with microbes and technology? How does that complicate the everyday idea of my body?
It's just our connection to others, including non-human others, might be fundamental to our existence, not just relational.
Finally, let's look at the absolutely crucial role of representation and narrative. The power of art, literature, storytelling, and navigating these transitions, maybe finding healing. The book discusses art as illness narrative using Hannah Wilkes' intravenous photos, documenting her lymphoma.
Yeah, Wilk used these self-portraits, taken as her body changed, to actively challenge ideas that illness excludes beauty or power. She offered this empowered vision even while showing the decay unflinchingly.
The authors draw on Merleau-Ponty, Lingus, about seeing and being seen. Lingus says to look is to become visible. Wilk was both object and artist, directing the gaze. Her art, the photos, created a second-order experience. The photo isn't just recording the self, it's a new artistic production creating meaning. Through her art, Wilk made the signs of cancer legible, making sense of death through creative action. Her composition guided the viewer's gaze, demanding attention, presence.
So the viewer's present with her.
Exactly, not just looking at her. And this connects directly to narrative medicine principles from Rita Charon. Attention, representation, affiliation.
Okay.
Wilk commanded attention, represented herself with vulnerability and beauty, and invited affiliation connection with her experience, unique but also universal.
The book also explores caregiver narratives, like Helen Coates and Catherine Lubbock writing about caring for a partner with GBM, that aggressive brain tumor. They highlight living in prognosis.
Where the illness's rapid, unpredictable nature makes coherent narrative almost impossible. They call them chaos narratives.
Because the usual story arc just breaks down when things are constantly, unpredictably deteriorating.
Must be incredibly hard to find a thread. The book also notes that narrative selfhood often depends on the other's recognition. The caregiver helps hold the story as the person's ability fades. Coates' account of witnessing her partner lose language, trying to track the separation, even when she cannot interpret the evidence.
That sense of separation is described as having a bitter taste. These narratives show the fragmentation, the emotional toll, the struggle to articulate experiences that defy language.
And this brings us back to health humanities and education. The book explains why it's being integrated into medical training.
Right, teaching social skills, communication, empathy, dealing with ambiguity, cultural awareness.
Pushing medical education beyond just the technical, emphasizing the human context. They use the example of teaching with poetry or graphic novels, graphic medicine.
Yeah, graphic medicine is described as disruptive to presumed objectivity. using visual and text to explore norms, taboos, complex experiences. It forces attention, embraces ambiguity, lets students see from diverse perspectives patients, caregivers, doctors' inner lives too.
So engaging with these representations helps cultivate a more nuanced, compassionate understanding, less purely clinical.
Exactly.
So bringing this last part to you, how can engaging with stories and art about illness, about bodies in transition, whether you create it, view it, read it, deepen your empathy, and how might this contribute to a healthcare system that's not just advanced, but more compassionate, equitable, seeing whole individuals?
Narrative isn't just about illness. It can be a tool for navigating it, making sense, building connection.
We have taken quite a deep dive into a collection that really shows just how complex, how fluid, and often how challenging our bodies in transition really are.
Yeah, from historical attempts to categorize bodies, often through these gendered idealized lenses, to contemporary struggles with identity, medical systems,
Yeah.
powerful personal narratives, and even realizing we're living microbial communities. The body is constantly a site of negotiation.
Negotiation with ourselves, with others, with the systems around us. And the Health Humanities offers such a vital lens for this, reminding us that fully understanding the body needs perspectives way beyond just the medical or biological.
It demands we engage with stories, cultures, politics, even philosophy. It challenges us to see the body not as a machine breaking down, but as this dynamic, embedded entity, always in motion, always becoming.
So let's leave you with this provocative thought drawn from these sources. If our bodies are constantly changing, always interacting with the world and countless other organisms, and if this challenges our very idea of a fixed individual self, how might truly embracing that fluidity, that complexity, fundamentally change how we treat our own bodies?
And perhaps even more importantly, how we relate to the bodies of others, especially those whose transitions or differences challenge our assumptions.
What does it mean to extend that sense of interaction and symbiosis beyond biology into our social and ethical lives?
Plenty to think about there.
Indeed, lots to chew on.